My name is David, and I like code. If there's any way I can be of help to you, remember the simple phrase, David can help me. So I'd like to talk about how we got to where we are today with Angular. When you build on top of the pile of Band-Aids that is JavaScript, you have to assemble quite an astounding number of pieces to complete your puzzle. The language itself is flawed, so you wind up importing libraries like Lodash to do simple things like loop through each element of an array. The language is old, so you wind up with polyfills and tool chains like Babel to get upcoming features today. And the language was originally designed as a flexible, simple, interactive layer on top of HTML, so its flexibility and weak typing make it less than ideal for efficient enterprise projects. We get so fed up with the whole thing that we actually resort to writing a different language entirely, called TypeScript. We're willing to go through those steps because of the benefits that we get. Now, JavaScript is a perfectly valid language to choose and to work with, and it's very robust for enterprise needs. And a lot of brilliant minds have been focusing on optimizing it and making it better and better. So all of these different ideas that we've had about the way that the future could go, when we've looked at the problems that we're facing, we've kind of been shaking down in society trying to decide, what do we developers actually want? Well, for a little while we thought about JavaScript as maybe being sort of like an assembly layer that we would compile things down to. So you start to see languages like CoffeeScript come out. You start to see TypeScript. You start to see Dart. And it's a very exciting thing for all of us to see that we have options. We're no longer boxed into this one single language that we kind of got stuck with. Now, there was a short period in history when we experimented a little bit with VBScript, and I've actually written some. I don't want to show anybody, and this is, I think, one of the first times I've admitted it publicly. But that wasn't going to happen. I kind of got stuck in this JavaScript world, which is fine. There's a lot of power there, but then we see these new worlds opening up, things that we're used to from enterprise development, things like having a type system that you can actually use to make sure that your code is doing what you expect it to do. Now, because of the fact that TypeScript is a strict superset of JavaScript, you're not actually going to eliminate JavaScript from that world. You have the opportunity to work with JavaScript, and that's one of the powerful things that you have working in that space. Now, when Dart first came out, and we're in Google's home, so as guests here, I'm not here to tell you what their thinking process is. But as an outsider, as a developer that was interested in Dart, I thought, okay, here's the future of the web. This is the language that will save us all. And of course, I get a little excited about things sometimes, so that probably was overthinking the problem. But it is a beautiful language, and it felt comfortable to me. It felt familiar, because this is something that has a syntax that is similar to the things that I've worked in, and it does things kind of the way I want them to do things. And maybe more importantly, it does not do the things that JavaScript does that are kind of weird. So I'm not here to try to ask you to use Dart or even try to really implement it in your workflow. If you do, that's great. But what I would really like for you to do is try Dart. So with that in mind, I'd like to show you what's different and what's the same between using the Angular framework in Dart and the regular Angular framework, which is now based in TypeScript. So round one, let's look at the features. This is just what's on the marketing pages. This is the sort of bullet point list of things that they're saying about themselves. The Angular version on the left side and the AngularDart version on the right side. So you can decide if you want to do things the left way or if you want to do things the right way. But these are the claims that they're making. And keep in mind, this is both of these are coming from Google. So for Angular 6, we see that they're saying you can develop across all platforms. This is really interesting to me because I would love to be able to write one code base and just make it pop up in every device you have here without really doing too much additional effort. I think that PWAs are a really great approach to kind of moving in that direction. And I think frameworks like Flutter that are allowing us to release code on multiple mobile platforms with a single code base are amazing and powerful. I know we mentioned the Brooklyn Dart programming meetup, but also please keep an eye out on the Flutter programming meetup here in Manhattan. It just had its first gathering on Thursday. Really good turnout, and it's an amazing framework. We heard from the guys that make the app for the Hamilton Broadway play. And I see a familiar face in the back here from that meetup. It's so great to be able to explore different things together. So developing across all platforms is the first thing that's being listed. Speed and performance. Now, I've criticized JavaScript a few minutes ago, and that's fine. I mean, JavaScript is really getting to be very powerful, very fast. I'm working a little bit with WebAssembly these days, and you would think with this new actual assembly layer that we can compile down to with other languages like Rust, that you would really see these incredible speed gains and just everything would be blowing you out of the water when you switch over to writing in that space. It turns out JavaScript is actually kicking butt. It's really fast, and there are a specific set of things that WebAssembly will, completely fly with. But you're not going to just switch your code from being JavaScript to all of a sudden being WebAssembly and necessarily see these huge gains that you would think. JavaScript's very powerful. However, there are some things going on that we heard about with the tree shaking and other stuff like that. They're really optimizing, and really this sort of cluster of tools that you find in the world of Angular are becoming more and more powerful to allow us developers not only to do things quickly, but to get the things that we do to be quick also. Incredible tooling is one of the claims that's made, and I agree, it is incredible. I'm wearing my Webpack t-shirt. I like using this t-shirt to start conversations about Dart, because I tell people, yeah, you like Webpack too, huh? Well, way back when I started working with Dart, we already had tree shaking and all of these different features that are just coming out now, so you should check that out too. But it's true, there's incredible tooling around Angular, and I'm not here to criticize the TypeScript version of Angular or even the JavaScript version of AngularJS. These are all very valid and powerful tools, and loved by millions. Now, this is a claim that you can see evidently on Stack Overflow and all around as you talk to different groups of people. People love Angular. It's powerful. And that's not perhaps a claim that you would hear made about AngularDart. Let's switch over here to the claims that are being made on the web page for AngularDart. Used in production. Okay. That's good to know, though, because who's using this in production? Well, it's Google that's using this in production, and they're using it for their flagship products. They're money makers. They're trusting their wallet with this. So I think that's a pretty big deal. It doesn't necessarily need to be millions of people that are using this for you to see that there's a really serious effort, a really serious commitment to this flavor of Angular. Easy to learn and use. I completely agree with that, because when I first saw Dart, I was like, I feel like I already know this language. It seems like this syntax is something that I've already sort of spent some time with. And there were some new cool things too that we'll look at in a couple minutes. Great with Angular. So on the AngularDart page, they say it's great with Angular. I think they're trying to reiterate the fact here that, even though Dart has its own ecosystem and its own language, you're just using Angular. I mean, there's some differences here, but you're not leaving. You're not going off to some weird little port like someone got it to run on a Super Nintendo or something. It's actually just Angular in a different space. And batteries included, and that's something that I'll talk a little bit more about that I feel is one of the strong points. So let's contrast. What are things that are different between the TypeScript version of Angular and the Dart version? TypeScript uses the TypeScript language, a strict superset of JavaScript. Dart uses the Dart language. And we'll look at that. I think it's beautiful. You might not like it. I do. I think it's really nice. And in Angular 6, you're going to see Webpack doing some heavy lifting. Okay, well, Dart has sort of this all-in-one ecosystem going on where you've got all of this wiring set up within the same project. You're not just asking one little language to transpile to another. You're not pulling in and bolting on this other tool that's going to run a process. It was all designed as one sort of unified piece. You've got NPM for package management. Well, Dart has its own thing there. We've got pretty much feature equivalence across these two different things. They're just different options, different ways of doing the same thing. Pub is the way that you would pull down a package that's been written in Dart. It's the same as using NPM in many ways. Also very similar, but just slightly different. You've got the ng command on the CLI for working with Angular, and you've got the ngDart command on the CLI for working with AngularDart. And what's happening when you're doing that on your system, there's an actual Dart VM, just like Node, but written by the same people, I think, V8 developers that started over and said, hey, what if we made this faster, better, stronger, and way cooler? And at least that's my opinion. So that's what's running. Instead of firing up an instance of Node to process all your stuff, you're still in Dart. You're still operating in that space, in that optimized VM. I've already mentioned that TypeScript is a strict superset of JS, and Dart is not necessarily something that you've used before, unless you've used Dart before, but it feels like it is. So even though Angular gives more power in the TypeScript world to JavaScript, Dart says, hey, what if we just came at this from a completely different angle? And if we look at the syntax that you would use for maybe a project name, on TypeScript side, you're going to use hyphenation. On Dart side, you're going to use underscores. Just little things that are different. And there are reasons behind all of those. If you're into that sort of thing, you want to really geek out on the details, there are some good YouTube videos and good blog posts that you could check out about that. So modules, if you want to be able to package up a chunk of your project and share it with others or just keep it separate, that's a really great way to design and architect your project. Module support, surprisingly, is not yet wired up in Dart's version of Angular, but you can go to the GitHub repository, you can watch the discussion. The work is done. It's getting out there in version 5.0. And it's a public conversation, so you can see everybody saying like, oh, I just need to wire this up to the tooling now, but it's actually working. So you're going to find things kind of neck and neck sometimes, but it's not really a competition. I remember in Colorado in 2015, I was working with a Fortune 500 company, and our team was using the mean stack. And we had our eye on what's next. And we saw Angular 2 coming, and we were kind of freaking out a little bit. And back then, we were using AngularJS. We had the option to try to stay on the cutting edge, but we really needed to stick with a long-term support approach to things. And then you see, wow, this big explosion of breaking changes with Angular 2. And I was coming to the team and I was like, well, you know what they're doing here. And my brother pointed this out too. They're basically kind of doing things the way that the AngularDart framework is doing them. They kind of went in that direction. So it's an interesting history if you're into that as well, looking at sort of the influences that have flowed throughout this project. And for testing tools, everything you're seeing on the left side here, these are all kind of different things that are being pulled together. And Dart brings all of that to you in just sort of one package. So what's the same? Well, TypeScript gives you superpowers because you can now specify types. And Dart, as of Dart 2, is going to give you strict typing. You actually have to. That's something that is, I think, a trend that's going to continue to rise, where people say, hey, I want to limit myself. I want to throw an error. I want my IDE to tell me, wait a second, you said that was a string. That's something that I think is valuable on both sides. Annotations, you're going to see that @ symbol where you can sort of write a parenthetical statement to the system and say, hey, this is what this is. Please go and do a lot of work for me so I don't have to. And both languages are going to be using that. Material design components are available for you in both sides. And you've got code generation on the CLI from both sides. Modules here, we've got support in 5.0, so basically both are the same there. Testing is available on both. Dependency injection, arrow functions, the fat arrow, so we've got shorthand syntax if you want to use that. And both are already pretty familiar for everybody, so when you read either code base, you feel pretty much at home. So how do you get it? Well, as I'm sure you know, for Angular you'd use npm. npm install global, so that anywhere you go, you can just spit out a project and create a new one here in this directory, in that directory. Same thing happening here with the Dart tool pub. Think pub is basically exactly npm, but Dart. You're telling it global, you're going to activate the Angular CLI. And again, note the underscore here. How do you serve Angular? You're familiar with ng-serve, pub-serve. Just basically trading one tool set for another. And if we want to look at some example code, much like the reason that we use frameworks to start with, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so I found something that someone put together that's a really good approach. If you're interested in trying out AngularDart, here's one thing you can do. Both of them have a tutorial that lets you go through this hero app. Raise your hand if you've ever done the hero app tutorial. So you're familiar with this. You're familiar with Angular. When you go through the Dart version, you're going to feel familiar with that too. And as you try it out, maybe you'll like it. This is what it looks like for a TypeScript constructor. I'm not arguing that either one of these is better than the other. This is just so that you can see side by side what is the difference. Here we see that we're using the constructor word keyword, and we're passing in these arguments. We're declaring the scope, saying that these are private. We're declaring the name of these arguments that we want. And afterwards, we're saying, hey, by the way, this is the type of thing this is. Now, over here in Dart, see that little underscore there? Is that too tiny? So that is basically the shorthand syntax that Dart is saying, this is private. You're not going to actually use a whole word dedicated to the idea. Just if your variable starts with an underscore, it's a private variable. And we're seeing this. So here's what's going on. That hero detail component is the same name as the class. That's a method, and it's the same name as the class. You might, if you've ever done PHP 4, I guess, you might remember if you are passing in the same name as the class, that is the constructor. So it's the same thing happening on both sides of the equation here. We're also passing 3 arguments. I could have put these 3 arguments over here in a single line. It would be a little bit longer, no big deal. This one is telling it this inside, remember we're inside a class here, and we're instantiating that class and saying, as we instantiate this private hero service and this route params and this location, well, this what? It knows that because of the fact that we have told it that the constructor is receiving these arguments, that we're basically telling it that we're wiring up a getter here. So getters and setters can be done with shorthand in a pretty compact way. All right, so TypeScript on the left, looking at methods. This should be familiar, ng on init. We are telling it that it's going to return a void type. And we're telling it that go back is returning type void. And we're telling it save hero, this method returns void. This is not what you're doing on the other side. In Dart over here, if you have an asynchronous method, you are not going to be able to return void. What you are going to return is a future, and that future can have a null type, but what you're doing is automatically tapping into this async and await process. Raise your hand if you've used async and await. So most people, you're familiar with that now because ES6, is it, has brought that into our world. 7, okay. Dart has had this for a little while, and so a lot of times, we like to argue about cell phones in our family. If you're an Android user or an Apple user, and it's like, well, I've had facial recognition since, those kind of conversations are fun. But what we're really looking at here is not so much better or worse, but rather, am I productive in this environment? And can I get things done? And do I feel comfortable? Do I like this? Do I like spending time in this place and writing code here and solving problems here? So let's take a look at a template in Dart. Does that look familiar to you? I mean, other than the weird quotation marks, because I typed this on the subway. Sorry about that. This is just what you're used to using. So you decide. What do you want to run on the back end? How do you want your logic to feel? How do you want it to look? Which ecosystem do you want to tap into? Kind of the decision process. Should you choose to use one or the other? You should probably choose Angular 6. If you're a web server, you should ride the big waves, and that's where all the momentum is. Now, if you've got the opportunity to play around with it a little bit, I think you should definitely try it. There's no question about that. But if you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, that Jimmy Buffett song actually tells the story of a married couple that respond to these online ads or printed ads, and they meet someone new and exciting, and it turns out that it's actually them. That's kind of how I feel about AngularDart. You feel like, oh, I'm off in this new world, I'm exploring this new thing, but you come back and you realize, oh, I never left home. This is just a different flavor. So this has just been a taste. Hopefully I've left you with more questions than answers so that you'll be inspired to go out and look at this more yourself. And of course, have these conversations and talk about which one you like better in public, online, so that it becomes part of the public body of knowledge and we can build this dialogue on the internet. And if you get stuck, Google it. Thank you, guys.